On this episode of Technically Leadership, I'm joined by Leonard to talk about the costs of intervention in a team discussion, whether that's to bring a team back to a topic or to make a decision that needs to be made. We discuss hero culture, both in the team and as the leader, imposter syndrome and anxiety around speaking up, practical tips to intervene and minimize the cost of that intervention, and more. Let's get to it. All right, everybody. By now, you will have heard the introduction for my guest today, Chris. Chris, you're here. I'm really excited to have
Hi.
you. Um,
Hey, thrilled to
yeah,
be
this
here.
should be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I want to start, though, with where you kind of got a lot of this information about dealing with how do you intervene in a conversation as a manager or as a leader. You told me, though, that you started out as a touring audio engineer. Is that right?
Yeah, honestly, and that's a place where you learn collaboration at its most
Yeah.
elemental. It's one thing to say you got to ship product a lot. It's another thing to have to ship your product every day at about 6 p.m. In front of 10,000 people.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've worked for a lot of the stars of the business as the audio engineer behind the boards, either on front of house or monitors. Sleeping in a tour bus with the rest of the crew, and often just feet from the star, him or herself. And in one case, there was actually a German Shepherd attack dog that went everywhere
Oh,
we went,
boy.
and he had the bottom just under me. And having seen what he was capable of on a few videos, made you mind your p's and q's when you're sleeping on the bunk just above him.
I bet it did, I bet it did. Oh,
It
man.
was a
But
wild
you so you
life.
got to deal with a lot of the strong personalities that you see in music that you also see in engineering, right?
Yeah. Honestly, it's not that different. It's people with rarefied domain knowledge who often feel like the world doesn't understand them, and
Absolutely.
who usually um, the outward perception of what they do for a living is so different than what it's actually like for
Right.
them. I think a big culture shock engineers and especially managers of engineers go through is that so many of them got into this line of work because they liked working alone, and they imagined themselves up late in front of a keyboard with nobody around, just grinding away at the software. And then they're all in all these darn meetings, and they're like, "Well, where did this come from?" And they don't realize that unless you can build a billion-dollar company by yourself, you need other
Right.
people. And as soon as you need a lot of other people, you're gonna have to spend a non-trivial amount of your day communicating with those people because there's only so much you can do through emails and through other not asynchronous communications channels. And so you got to talk to
Right.
people. You got to spend time together. You got to actually build the team into a high-performing unit that can do this thing better than the sum of its parts. That's the part that I think so many, especially leaders, don't understand until they're in the middle of doing it
Right.
wrong.
Right, exactly. 100%. Now, I guess we kind of got to this point when we were talking before we started recording that you came on this topic of weighing this cost of intervention when you watched an episode of The Office. Can you tell me about that a
Yeah,
little bit? Like, what started this
yeah,
whole
totally.
process in your head?
Oh, man. There were 2 moments, and that's, like, the first one. The first one is the very first, the pilot episode of The Office, I can't even watch anymore. I've watched it, like, twice, and I can't do it again. There's this DEI training that's, like, the core moment of the episode, um, and it is so uncomfortable as like Michael Scott is trying to grandstand his way through this thing. And we've all seen this train wreck unfold in person. And to watch it on TV, I'm telling you, I can watch medieval battles where people tear each other's bodies apart and not flinch. And I cannot watch this scene without having to crawl under my
Right.
couch. Like it is so physically uncomfortable for me when people are being that awkward and that cringy. Like cringe television is just not for me.
Yeah.
I can't do it. What that made me realize is I'm sitting there thinking about the level of discomfort I feel. And I've felt that discomfort a lot as I'm watching a team try to figure things out and doing it, I think,
Mhm.
wrong. As they're stumbling their way toward a solution, I think is self evident, is obvious. And it seems like it's not obvious to anybody else. And it is just physically painful to sit there and not say
Right.
anything. But I realized that the second you do, you're at risk of being the Michael Scott in the room who tries to grandstand his way through this thing when what we should all be doing is just being better listeners to each
Right.
other. And you don't necessarily have the right answer because you don't know everything.
Mhm.
And you're never going to learn what you don't know unless you've got your ears open and you're not thinking about what you're going to say next. This is where so many of us trip up. And that gave me the idea.
Yeah.
I actually have another moment
Oh,
that gave
yeah?
me the idea. We're in
I
Austin,
am.
right? Okay, there's this thing Austin's a little bit famous for, which is brisket.
Yes.
I also do some pit mastering on the side myself, and I'm very very partial to brisket.
Mhm.
Here in Tennessee, get some good brisket, not nearly the embarrassment of riches you've got at your fingertips down there. The pit masters all say the same thing: if you're looking, you ain't cooking. That is cooking barbecue of any kind is absolutely one of those situations where intervention has a non-trivial cost. You are losing heat, you are losing smoke, and you are lengthening your cook every single time you open the damn thing to intervene in it. So it's always better if you can hold back, trust the process, and wait on those little interventions before
Yeah,
intervening.
so let's actually kind of get into that topic of intervention. Like, first things first, let's define what you mean by intervention and kind of weighing
Yeah.
the cost of it. You're talking about you're in a meeting or you're in some kind of discussion and you need to halt the conversation, right? Or you need to redirect it.
I have two primary use cases here, and that's the first one. The other one I'm thinking of is often when a team is all working, heads down, everyone's at their desks or in their separate homes with their headphones on. They're all working, and you have an oh crap moment where you can sense we're not going to land on time, or we're working on the wrong thing, or we need to change the plan, or something is wrong here. And now what are we going to
Right.
do? In one of those two situations, we've all been there before, and you got to ask yourself, what's the first thing I do, and how long do I wait to
Right.
do it?
Okay.
The more common one I think we all run into, especially if we do any facilitating of any kind, and if you're someone's manager or project manager or scrum master or heck, just a consultant of
Mhm.
any kind, you're going to run into this sooner or later. And there's a natural drift that groups have when they're trying to work on a thing together, where they start out focused and they get either too in the weeds or too off topic, vertically or horizontally misaligned with where this thing is going, what we all met here to do, why this was supposed to be a good investment of our
Mhm.
time. Sooner or later, somebody's got to artfully get it back on track. The thing is, we're usually
You mean
I've watched people do this over
y-
the years, and these managers, these scrum masters, these project managers, we are usually wrong about intervening at the right
ah,
moment, and we often cause more damage than we prevent.
okay. It's like you're saying we're usually wrong because it's the wrong moment or it's the wrong way to do it or both? Both.
Both.
Okay. Okay.
Imagine you're at a restaurant
Yeah.
and you've had a really good time, and it's like your anniversary dinner or something like that. And so you budgeted a lot for this meal, and so you're basically not paying attention to prices. You see your favorite whiskey or cocktail on the list and you order it. You see your favorite dish on the list and you order it. You maybe get two more appetizers than you
Right.
normally would, because why not? This is the big splurge of the year. And then you get the bill, and you hand them your card without even looking at it and adding it up, and then you get the non-itemized credit card receipt, and you look at the number on that receipt and you have no idea how that number
Right.
got there. Now you really really wish you could have seen that itemized receipt, because you are very surprised, and this must be some kind of mistake. This happens to us all the time when we intervene with our
Mhm.
teams, because we actually don't see the costs that we're incurring in the
Right.
process. I'll There are a
Yeah.
few.
I'm curious.
First, there's the relational
Mhm.
costs. Oftentimes what we are witnessing, what we are getting impatient with, is there are two factions who have opposing viewpoints about what we should do next. An API or a FIFO queue, refresh the server or upgrade the server, uh, go out for Mexican or go out for Indian. I don't know. Whatever it is, the team's at loggerheads, and we want to settle to the dispute because back to the office, we're uncomfortable.
Right.
The thing is, if we intervene, we are often taking the side of one side of that thing or the other. And there's a relational cost to doing it, especially if you're the one signing the paychecks,
Yeah.
guys. If you're the boss, if you have hiring and firing power, or if you're the head of the whole organization, then taking a side sends unconscious messages about who's in and who's out.
Mm.
And we're still, even if you have to take a side, even if we've all got our backs against the wall, time's ticking, and we're not going to make payroll next week unless we do something today, the way you take the side can often make a bigger difference than whether you did or
Mhm.
not. If you do have to take a side in a conversation like that, in a dispute like that, in a solutioning conversation, always be careful. This is my advice to engineering managers of every kind. Always be careful to frame the decision in terms of what the right decision would look like first, and then asking them which path do you think is going to fit that the
Right.
best. Make it about what's right, not about who's right.
Gotcha. That makes sense. I would imagine that trying to find that it takes a lot of practice. And you have to be very, very careful that you aren't digging into maybe a bit of a hero culture of like this person is the one person who solved it kind of thing. You need to avoid that situation altogether, right?
Yeah. And I think the bigger hero culture problem I think managers run into is that oftentimes by virtue of getting to being a manager or a leader or even a CEO, but through that path of always being the smartest person in the room and the fastest problem solver, you get hooked on this little dopamine hit that you get
Yeah.
when you save the day. And you start telling yourself a story where you're always the hero swooping in to save the
Mhm.
day. And that's a really key pattern you got to fight. Because, yeah, the dopamine hit feels good, but that doesn't mean that the story you're telling yourself is true.
Right.
Think how many times you have heard, the perennial water cooler conversation between two coworkers about something that happened that
Mhm.
day. And someone is talking about the moment they saved the day.
Yeah.
And we've all been there and overheard this and thought, I was in that meeting and that's not what I said. Because we so often tell ourselves that we saved the day when what we actually did was get everybody off track and cost the group half an hour
Right.
because we brought up the thing nobody needed to think about. It was a total distraction that we wouldn't have even brought up if we'd been listening more carefully.
Mhm.
So fighting that hero culture of either thinking somebody else is the smartest person in the room and we should always take their side because that's a lot easier than learning what the right decision would be on the
Mhm.
merits, or hero culture of I'm going to be the
Yeah.
savior. I love being the savior. I've got the red cape on. This is how we all got here. We're only here because I'm so smart. We got to fight both those things because both of those are going to incur huge
Right.
costs.
I usually call that when it comes to a leader, especially a leader, let's say in a startup, I often call that founder
Uh-huh.
syndrome, where I'm the one who knows.
Founder syndrome will kill
Yes,
you.
absolutely. Anytime it's that I know better than everyone else because I'm the one who came up with this. I'm the one who came up with the company. I'm the one who's running it. I always kind of caution someone saying like, "Hey, remember you cannot have gotten here alone. There is no way you can." So,
We're all here for a reason,
exactly,
aren't we?
yeah. Like, otherwise, you wouldn't have needed to hire anybody else, right? You could have just done it yourself.
Yeah.
And, if somebody wants to take me up on that challenge and do it all themselves, then go more power to you. I will sit over here and watch. But anyway, that kind of gets off of this. But I imagine though that on the other hand, there might be some anxiety that a leader has in trying to time that intervention or decide what the intervention is when it comes to you have such strong personalities in the room that you're working with because you said personality is or like interpersonal relationships is one of the biggest costs. How do you deal with that
Yes.
anxiety part?
I think a lot of leaders, especially if they're new to being a leader, are guilty of playing a leader on TV. I mean, this is the perennial
Ah,
Michael Scott
okay.
problem. You've got a little bit of imposter syndrome about the fact that you're in charge of all these people and that you've got this $2 million budget at your fingertips or whatever it ends up being. And that's pretty nerve wracking if you never thought you'd be here in your career. And you may lose a little bit of sleep at first, wondering, like, how soon it's going to be before everyone figures out that you have no idea what
Right.
you're doing. By the way, your CEO is wondering the same thing, and so is the venture capitalist who gave them all their money that
Yep.
you're living on. So just realize, first of all, this imposter syndrome thing you're fighting, that's the source of so much of your anxiety, is absolutely capital U universal. Everyone you idolize has had it. Everyone you idolize probably still has it.
Mhm.
So like start there. Um, Second, the anxiety you feel is something you got to manage in your life because it's universal. It's something that is at the table with us every time we show up with our teams. It's at the table with us when we go home to our
Mhm.
families. So realizing when the voice of anxiety and imposter syndrome are talking to you is incredibly important. I know, especially if you're in a role where you're not directly producing code, you're not
Right.
directly building product. You're If you're in sort of especially project managers I talk to a lot that run into this all the time, there's the constant nagging voice of, am I doing enough?
Mhm.
And a lot of times that leads to performing the role of being the boss on TV, looking like the boss, talking like the boss, grandstanding as I'm doing now,
Well,
of course. But on the
yeah, you're on
podcast,
a
this is
podcast.
different.
You're my guest. That's the point. So,
Yeah, I'm supposed to sit here and talk a lot. But when you're the boss, like you get into this routine a lot of times of just talking at your team too much because you're playing the boss on TV because that's the only moment maybe that feels like you're actually earning your role, your title, and your pay. The thing is, the best bosses listen the best. The best bosses ask the best
Mhm.
questions. The best bosses learn the fastest and care the most. They don't necessarily talk the most or intervene the most.
Right. That makes sense. So let me ask you then, what do you think a good intervention looks like?
Yeah, I love this because so many times the thing we do when we intervene is we just immediately put our thumb on the scale.
Mm,
It's really easy to intervene by just saying, "All right, someone's got to make a decision, and the decision is this." And a lot of times that is biased toward what we wanted to do in the first place. I think the best intervention is almost always a question.
okay.
You know, if you come out of agile coaching, one of the things that they'll teach you in that realm is how to ask powerful questions. I think powerful questions are one of the best super skills that a leader of any kind can
Mhm.
have, especially when you're trying to do, one-on-one interactions with your teammates. But it works really great in a group setting too. And the best powerful questions, in my opinion, start with what and how.
Mhm.
How might we? What have you thought of? What haven't you thought of? Who have we not heard from yet is another good
Right.
one. That breaks my what and how rule, but it's also a good one. My favorite thing about asking questions, my favorite thing is that when you ask a powerful question as your form of intervention, you can't be wrong.
Yeah.
When you advance your viewpoint, you might be saying something that makes no sense to the people you're saying it to, and you might really put your foot in your mouth and get egg on your face. And yeah, I know we're all that goes back to the imposter syndrome fear that we're all dancing with
Right.
in our jobs, but it also is a real risk of getting egg on your face and losing the confidence of the group, or just distracting the group with them spending the next 15 minutes explaining to you why that's such a dumb idea when they can't tell you directly that that's a dumb idea because they're the one signing their paychecks.
Mm,
Um, but when you ask the question, there's a pretty good chance that the answer to the question is going to be something you didn't think of, that's smarter than what you would have thought of. And that the person who answers the question is going to be the person who hasn't spoken up yet, who was afraid to speak up until you asked the
huh.
question.
Okay. That makes sense.
So I think that's the best form of intervention. The second thing I would tell people is while you're intervening, read the room. Watch for those signs of frustration, disengagement, or annoyance when you do have to intervene. Because if you see people, oh, I don't know, look in a co-located situation where you're in a room breathing the same air as each other, it's really easy to pick up on this stuff. Our bodies are very tuned to pick this up in other
Mhm.
people. Online, remote work, not so easy. We don't have all those same nonverbal cues. Though if we have cameras on, we've got a few. If you see people suddenly turn their cameras off or unmute, then mute, unmute, mute. If you see the little
Right.
unmute dance going on and cameras going off, there's a pretty good chance you just stepped in it. You got to be tuned to those nonverbals. Um, if you hear typing in the background, if you and that means people are probably back channeling as you're
Mhm.
talking, probably a sign that you're taking the group off course and you need to back up. So I say watch the nonverbals, read the room, and third, ask for feedback
Right.
afterwards. Don't ask directly for feedback though, because if you're the boss or just someone people want to please in general, then asking directly, did I step in it back there, is always going to preload the conversation with the nicest possible answer, which is what people will tell you every
Right.
time. A very rare person who's going to want to tell you, yeah, you really screwed that up. Most likely, they're going to want to avoid conflict and avoid making you feel uncomfortable, and they're going to tell you whatever they think you want to hear. So don't preload them with the right answer. Instead, use a powerful question like, "How was that for you? How do you think that went today?
Mhm.
What do you think we could have done better today?" By by opening things up, one, you might get feedback that you're not expecting. That's not even about you because your intervention may not be the worst thing that happened or the best thing that happened.
Right.
But two, you're going to learn a lot more, and you're going to set a stage for the conversation where the person can actually be candid with you.
Makes sense. So really I'm hearing be curious more than anything else.
Mhm.
Just be curious, ask questions, and understand that you're not going to be the smartest person in the room here. And that maybe a key to a good intervention is just that
Yes,
drive to understand. That seems to be
yes.
the bigger
I
problem.
think you have to start with the assumption that your team is smarter than the sum of its
Mhm.
parts and smarter than any one person on the team. And if you start with that assumption, then you got to be curious because the best answer is never going to be the one that's in your head alone. It's always going to be the synthesis of everyone's diverging
Mhm.
perspectives. That's why the design thinking double diamond
Right.
exists. It's the presumption that the best outcome is not going to be a straight line. It's going to be at the end of diverging and converging and diverging again and converging again about the best
Right.
solution. So being curious about other people's perspectives is a necessary prerequisite, or else the double diamond is just a straight line.
That makes sense. That makes sense. In in that case, do you find some people when they hear that from you, they then start withdrawing from more conversations so that they can come in at the right moment to ask that question? And uh, is that a mistake? Like where they don't
It
participate?
can be. Yeah, people tend to. I mean, I'm guilty of this myself. People tend to operate in oscillating
Right.
extremes, too much and then too little. I only have two boards in my workshop. I have the ones that are too long and the ones that are too short. Um, I say in my studio, I have two kinds of mic cables, the kind that are too long and
Right.
too short. Uh, Yes. So we tend to operate in extremes. Here's my antidote. Here's a really practical tip I give everybody who's struggling with this. I call it the 5 minute rule. This is great, especially in sprint planning, backlog grooming, PI planning, OKR planning, quarterly planning, all the way up to like a C suite or a board meeting. Wait 5 minutes. Whenever you think we're off track, whenever you think it's time for somebody to re steer this thing and get us back where we're supposed to be going, wait 5 minutes, look at the time, maybe even set a real timer. And if in the course of that 5 minutes, you learn something that changes your judgment of the situation from what it was when you set the timer, you need to reset the timer because this thing is still evolving and there's still more that you don't know. But if the timer goes off, there's a pretty good chance that the group has gone from divergence and convergence down to
Mhm.
entrenching, spinning, things like that, where it's going to get less and less productive. And you're past the point of diminishing returns now. And that's the moment.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So I guess would this be how you know when you really need to intervene is using that kind of a rule?
That's one of my best rules of thumb
Okay.
for learning when to intervene. I also say check in with your body, because yes, there's you know what your body feels like when you're
Mhm.
anxious. You know what your body feels like when you're starved for dopamine. We've touched on both those things
Right.
already. What about the more basic things? Hungry, thirsty, and need to
Yep.
pee. I don't know how many times people cut off conversations that need to happen and debates that aren't done yet because they need to go to lunch or they need to just go take a bathroom break or something like
Right.
that
Right.
because they're just physically uncomfortable sitting here any longer and they want to go, man. Like, so go take care of your needs. One of the a meeting superpower that I think is so underrated is just pausing a
Mm,
meeting, even if it's only half an hour or an hour, to say, "Can I just go cool off for 5 minutes and get a cup of coffee?" And then coming back with a slightly refreshed perspective can be so great, especially in a contentious meeting. If conflict is starting to escalate in a meeting and people are starting to
right.
spin, even productive
Yeah.
conflict, but productive conflict can still make people emotional and triggered. And taking the temperature down can be one of the great ways to lean back into productive conflict in a way that synthesizes people's views to something better than the sum of its
Right.
parts.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, as someone who doesn't always think on my feet in a meeting very well, having that moment to step back and like, okay, let me process that. I usually come back a lot stronger. I'll usually take myself out of the room just for a minute or two and go just do like
Yeah.
get my water filled or something. Like I'll have an excuse with me. I'm one of those people that will carry the water bottle with me to meeting, but I
Oh
actually
yeah.
explicitly usually don't fill it before a meeting so that I
Oh,
have that
interesting. Yeah.
excuse to, "Oh, I just need to go get a cup of water. I'll be right back." Because it gives me a chance to
Yeah.
get out
Totally.
of the space and think like, "Okay, what did I learn? What did I hear? How do I come back to this?" And if I'm the leader of the meeting, I'll say, "Keep talking. You can fill me back in when I get back." Because sometimes just removing me from the room facilitates the conversation, and then I have to figure out why did removing me from the room facilitate the conversation? But it does, because people suddenly feel like they can speak up when the boss isn't in the room listening and hearing that
Yes.
maybe you asked a question that someone didn't agree with. Then I have to work on that interpersonal thing that says, "No, really, you're allowed to ask any question in front of me. I am not intimidated." But
Yeah. Totally.
yeah, that
I totally agree. Like, and there is also the fact that if you're signing people's paychecks and choosing who gets to be in the
mhm.
room, the very fact of power is always going to put some irreducible floor on how much you can do on
Yeah.
that. There's You can make yourself the most approachable leader in the world, but the fact of power is going to always limit just how approachable you can be. Doesn't mean you shouldn't maximize it
Right.
though. And most leaders still have a long way to go.
Now, what about what would you say to the leader that maybe is intervening too much? You mentioned the interpersonal cost. What other costs are
Yeah.
there to this? Like
Um,
I get too involved and I say too many times, "Hey, let's stop it here. Let's make this decision.
yeah.
Let's do this thing."
Yep. Yep.
What other costs are there?
You're going to make yourself the bottleneck for
Right.
everything. You do not have enough hours in the week. You do not have enough waking hours in your life to make every decision for your team. It's going to really suck. And the more times you do that, this is even worse. The more times you make yourself the bottleneck and send the unconscious message that you can't do the right thing around here without consulting the boss and making sure it's
Mm,
okay, you're going to encourage these approval seeking behaviors where people come to you with what they think is the right answer, but are afraid to do until you approve it. And the more that that happens, all the people of drive, independent vision, initiative, they're going to leave for places where they can exercise independent judgment and initiative and drive.
right.
Where places where that sort of attitude is welcome. And the people who take their place are going to be a bunch of order takers who sit around and wait for somebody to tell them what to do. And you do not have enough hours in your life to do great
Mhm.
things with always having to tell people exactly what to do
Right.
next. It's just not feasible.
Yeah, I can see that.
So I call that the practical cost of intervention. It's the cost of making yourself the bottleneck in every decision. And it also, of course, there's a technical cost to it as well, because it means the solutions that your team produces are never going to be smarter than what you could have come up with by yourself. You're never going to come up with a better idea than the one you've got. And if that's the case, like you're probably in big trouble because I bet the best feature in every software shop didn't come from the CEO. And I bet especially the best engineering genius that found the shortest path to value through the thicket of tech
Mhm.
debt and spaghetti code was not the thing that like the boss came up with. It probably didn't come from a VP or a director. It was probably some engineer who really didn't want to talk to anybody who came
Yeah.
up with it. And they never would have gotten the chance if somebody hadn't looked at the guy in the corner looking at his phone and said, "Hey, man, what do you think?"
Yeah. And just kind of said, "Come on, let's talk a little bit." Uh,
Yeah, yeah. There's a pretty good chance that the person who doesn't want to talk or has been shouted down too many times actually has the best idea in
huh.
the room. And if you're not actively seeking that out, and you said being curious, then you're probably never going to hear that perspective, and you're losing out on a lot of the expertise you're paying good, hard American money
Yeah.
for.
No, that makes sense. We I was gonna say, I just talked to somebody, but for people listening, this was last episode. We were talking about how do you get the entire team to speak? So this is the same kind of another side of that same
Yes.
coin is how do you get that conversation to happen and encourage that? And I guess this is part of the cost of intervention. Now,
Yeah.
I guess one other thing about it is how do you're going to have to intervene at some point, right? And you're going to have to maybe make some decisions that might not be popular. Maybe you will have to do to reach out to somebody and say, this is the decision we're going to go to. And you had talked about how to phrase that, how to word it. But how do you minimize that cost of intervention, knowing that you have to do it? You can't just let things
Yeah.
go. But how do you minimize that?
I think another tip that I haven't shared yet is reflecting back to divergent perspectives
Hmm.
and normalizing the disagreement. Okay, here's what I've heard so far, guys. I've heard three of you say this. I've heard two of you say this, and I've heard one of you say this. There might be a middle ground between these, but honestly, what I'm hearing is that there probably isn't, and that the middle ground is actually the worst of both
Hmm.
worlds. So, you want to know my perspective? I think the right solution would be something that does this. That's a great way to couch the decision. That's not going to pick a faction. It's going to pick a
All right.
solution, and that sees
Hmm.
everybody. The, the way I phrase that, nobody's smarter than anybody else. We're just talking about trade offs
Right.
here. But by addressing the fact that we all disagree and that's okay, but then saying we got to make a decision anyway, I think it normalizes that conflict in a way that leans into that first strength of a high performing team. away from that one of what is it, the five dysfunctions of a
Yeah.
team, which is like the lack of productive disagreement. You want to lean away from that one by encouraging disagreement, like normalizing it. It's like it's great that we disagree on
Yeah.
this thing. It's actually not a problem. Like normalize the conflict of the group, normalize the fact that we're going to come from differing perspectives and that we're going to have to grind those perspectives up against each other to find the optimal solution. And as a leader, you might occasionally have to say, is there anything are there any perspectives we haven't heard yet that we need to
Hmm.
hear? That's also a very powerful question you can just ask a group. I don't like binaries, but if you got to use a binary. The other version of it is what perspectives haven't we heard yet that are still out there?
Right.
Digging more of that stuff out from under the rug can be a great way to minimize the cost. And then when the room is truly quiet for 10 seconds after you say that, yeah, now's the
Yeah.
time. Now's the time to go ahead and say, I see you, I see you, I see you. And I think the path ahead through the mountains is this. Let's
Right.
do it,
That
guys.
makes
Can we all agree to disagree
Yeah,
now?
that makes sense. So I actually do this whenever I ask a question. I mentally am counting to 5 or 10. And I actually did this once to my VP in the middle of a call. I started telling him that you ask a question and then you move along too fast. So
Oh yeah.
I would sit there in the meeting and he could watch me counting at him. And what you can't see because of course audio is a visual medium, right? Is that I'm literally holding my hands up and counting to 5 on each hand. Uh, that's what I would do to him, and it was that visual cue that he needed to leave space for silence, and almost inevitably, by the time I got to around 7 or 8 was when someone would chime in, someone who you didn't
Yeah.
hear from. So, I usually
Yes.
find that is a wonderful way to bring up that perspective once you say, like, "What else haven't we considered?" And you wait.
I guess and
Yes,
that.
absolutely, you can.
Um, I deal a lot with offshore teams.
Mm,
I deal a lot with people who have English as their second language, but we're conducting all the business in English. And anytime that's the case, you probably need to double that from 5 to 10 seconds or from 10 to 20 seconds because here's what's happening. Let's break down what's going on in those 20 seconds. The first 2 seconds, someone starts paying attention and realizes that it's quiet and goes, "Oh shoot, did he ask a question?" Next 3 seconds, the person is playing it back in their head, going, okay, that's what the question was. The next 3 seconds, they're translating that into the mother tongue, whatever they grew up
mhm.
speaking. The next 3 seconds, they're thinking of their answer. The next 3 seconds, they're translating their answer back into the mother
Yeah,
tongue and they are back into English. And then they are finally sitting there going, well, if no, is anyone else going to say anything? Am I going to interrupt somebody
yeah.
here? Should I say it? Should I say it? And then finally, at the 20-second mark, they are finally chiming in. You got to, do you know how unbearable 20 seconds of
Y
silence on a Zoom call can
yes.
be? It is excruciating, guys, but it's necessary if you want to hear from
Yeah.
other people.
Yeah, so people who are listening may know this about me. I don't think you know this about me. I've done a lot of presentations. I used to be a developer advocate. I still kind of am, but getting up there on stage and silence is the most impactful thing you can do when you're talking. That moment where you make a statement and you just stop. People get uncomfortable. They take a minute and they say, "Oh wait, maybe I need to think about what that just said." And then you move forward. The same thing happens with a question, but you have to learn to be super uncomfortable with a question. Whether you're up on stage, you're managing a community, you're talking to your team, that super comfort with silence means that someone's going to fill in this gap. And if they're not, there's nothing left to kind of shake out somewhere, to me at least. And I guess that's kind of what you're saying.
A lot of I love physiologically what happens in a crowded room full of
Hmm.
people when the odd hush comes. When the speaker, you know, does the mic drop moment of the talk, lays out the big idea, and then stands there silently waiting for everyone to absorb it. The it's incalculable what you give up if you can't sit in that
Yeah.
silence. What happens in the silence? I got to tell every leader on this thing when you are listening to uncomfortable silence, what you are witnessing is growth and learning. And if you can't sit there and witness growth and learning comfortably, then you might be, by intervening in that moment, sending the unconscious message that it's not okay to sit here and grow and learn in front of the boss. It's not okay to do that. We need to hide our growth and learning. That's something you do in your own time, but you don't get to say an untested idea in front of the boss around here. And there's a lot of ways to drive an organization to the ground, and I've seen a lot of them over the
Yeah.
years. One of the most insidious ones is to slowly send the message that we can't learn in front of each other anymore,
Mm.
because you're going to learn a lot slower if that's the case.
And we'll just kind of let that mic drop right there.
Yeah, for those keeping track at home, we're doing that thing where you let the silence sit there.
Mostly because I think it's a really, really important thing that for people to take away from this conversation is just understanding that, we talked about intervention, we talked about all sorts of different things, but really this is all about growth, right? And
Yeah.
whether that's letting someone else grow in front of you or you as a leader growing because you're learning something from your team, whatever that is, growth is important.
Yep.
So,
And if this sounds easy, then come with me to my house at I don't know 7:45 in the morning and watch me watching my 2-year-old put on his shoes,
mhm,
and keep your hands at your sides the entire time. Don't don't touch those shoes as you watch them. Put them on the wrong feet, and then put them on backwards, and then screw up the Velcro, and then try to jam his foot into a shoe that's already Velcroed tight as it can possibly go, and get frustrated, and try to say and do nothing for the 3 minutes that you're watching
right.
this, and tell me how easy that is for you. Think if you intervene in that moment, that kid's going to be putting having you put on his shoes for his whole darn
Right.
life. This is how growth happens. You got to sit there and let the toddler put on his shoes.
Yeah. Yeah, like, that's like a thank you for coming to my TED Talk right there. That moment right there.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, yeah. Yeah, I've seen that so many
So
times.
I've touched on all the dad topics today so far, except I guess the Roman Empire.
We
Maybe
haven't
we
gotten
haven't
to the
gotten
Roman
there yet.
Empire. I don't
I've,
know what we could do. Maybe like
I've done barbecue, rock and roll.
how
We've done
we've done kids. We
yeah.
could do I guess we could talk about how Rome wasn't built in a day, so you have to have some
Oh
silence,
yeah,
right?
totally. That's a great
Um
one. Marcus Aurelius was a real master of not over intervening. He didn't get one to go back to.
oh, that's perfect. That's perfect. All right. Well, as much as I love this conversation and I've had so much fun listening and learning so much from you, we are getting close to the end of the episode. But I want to give you the chance. This is your moment to tell people what you're up to, plug what you want, let people know where they can find you to continue the conversation, any of that. Go for it. This is yours.
My new offering that I'm doing right now is the 40-day team accelerator. I know we've all got projects in escalation that need to be turned around now. And so the 40-day team accelerator is the thing where you need somebody to come in and straighten this team out fast and get it back on a sustainable path to delivering on time. I have found in a long time of helping teams with infrastructure projects and agile projects in software delivery that I deliver most of the value of building a high performing team in the first 40 days. So honestly, I think the best thing I can do for you and anybody else in this business is come in and do that magic thing where I get the team back on a sustainable, successful footing as fast as possible, and then hand the keys back to you so you can keep doing the thing really well. So that's what I'm doing right now. If you need to, if you are interested in turning around a team or project that's in escalation under you, find me at noimpediments.com and book a free consultation. And I cannot wait to talk to you about what's going on with your team and how we can make them happy and delivering on time again.
Makes sense. Don't worry, that will be in the show notes if anybody wants to go and catch up there, as well as information on how to get in touch with you on LinkedIn as well. We'll have, I think I have your Instagram to be able to share stuff like that. Maybe we'll get some more inspirational tips. I don't even know. But on that note, I want to say thank you so much for joining me and talking about this. This was awesome.
Thank you so much, Laura. This was an absolute
Yeah,
hoot.
good.
I love having
Yeah.
talks like this.
Well, hopefully you all enjoyed this as much as I did. And I will catch you next time for the next episode of Technically Leadership. But we're going to say bye for now. Thank you so much.
Yay.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.